Intermittent fasting helped me lose 80 pounds, and it also taught me a lot about myself. Up until I was about 31 years old, I struggled with my weight. And when I finally found intermittent fasting and really started to practice it consistently, it taught me some really important lessons. The first lesson it taught me was that I was a stress eater. And this was a revelation to me. You know, if you had asked me before I started intermittent fasting if I was a stress eater, I would say, I think everybody from time to time, eats because they're stressed, but I do no more of that than a normal person. But when I started being consistent with intermittent fasting and, really obeying the fasting window, I started to see just how often I had been grabbing food because I was stressed. I mean, so many times I would just find myself in the fasting window, standing in front of the pantry, looking for a snack and then, kind of coming to my senses and thinking, well, I can't eat right now. Why am I standing in front of the pantry? And I realized I'm stressed out right now about, X, Y, or Z. And I was, just in this very well ingrained habit of getting a snack when I was stressed. And as a bonus, since, intermittent fasting just took eating off the table as a way to deal with stress, it kind of forced me to learn how to deal with stress in better ways. The second lesson it taught me was that I didn't need to be afraid of hunger. When I first started practicing intermittent fasting, it was really difficult because I had this idea in my head that, if I ever felt hungry, it meant that I had waited too long to eat and that I was going to put my body into starvation mode and that my metabolism was going to crash and burn and I would never lose the weight. It was only with intermittent fasting that I realized how backwards that was. I mean, the idea that like as soon as you feel hungry, you should eat, just stuff food in your mouth when you're obese. I mean, it makes no sense at all, but I was just so well conditioned to think that way. And intermittent fasting, made it so that it was like, no, you just need to not eat right now. And of course, I lost weight when I started doing that. And it was really interesting to me to see how afraid I was of hunger, but then also to learn I could wait, that I really would be fine if I just waited until my eating window opened up to eat. The third lesson it taught me was that sometimes hunger wasn't even really hunger. And this is something I really didn't understand. I used to think, well, hunger really means that you're hungry. But as it turns out, there was plenty of times where I felt very hungry, but I wasn't actually hungry. And what I mean by that was, I started to see that many times I used hunger, as a way to procrastinate. So for example, like I would think, okay, I'm going to sit down and try to write something. Well, then I would think, well, but I need to eat something first, all of a sudden, I would feel hungry. And then I started to realize, no, that was just kind of like a way that I had, created to procrastinate on these things. And so I had to learn how to kind of discern true hunger, from just like eating out of habit or eating out of stress or eating because I was procrastinating. The fourth lesson I learned was that I had been wasting a lot of my time and energy on food. Once I started doing intermittent fasting, I started to see, when I was comparing what my mornings looked like when I was doing intermittent fasting versus what they had looked like beforehand, I realized like so much of my time was just spent on thinking about food and dealing with food in some form or fashion. And it was really difficult because I was obese at the time. And so there was a lot of mental space that was taken up by food. Like every time I would think about eating, it would be this big battle in my head, like, well, what do I need to eat? Well, is it better to eat, eggs, or should I have something like toast, or is toast bad for you? But I want to learn how to eat the right amount of food. I want to have toast in my life. And it would just be this big thing. A lot of stress and a lot of thinking about food would happen. And then, I'd finally eat. And then, a little while later, I'd be hungry again. So then it'd be back again to thinking about, what should I eat, and this battle in my head. And, then the actual finally picking something to eat and then, eating the thing. And it took up a lot of my energy and a lot of my time. And it's still incredible to me how much more free time I have these days because I do intermittent fasting. And the fifth lesson, and probably the most important one, was learning that weight loss really is simple. And it was something that I had really made so complicated. Throughout my entire life, I always felt like weight loss was really complicated, and that, it was kind of like part luck, maybe part, magic, part, eating just the right kind of combination of foods and all that. But with intermittent fasting, I finally learned, and I really got it through my head, that weight loss just meant that I needed to eat less than what my body was burning. And that, you know, the reason I had gained weight was because I had been eating too much. And that if ever the scale starts to go up, it just means I'm eating too much. And if I want the scale to go down again, I need to eat a little bit less. Because that's exactly what I did with intermittent fasting. I did not change the foods that I was eating. All I did was I ended up changing the amounts of food that I was eating, and intermittent fasting helped me do that. I was able to eat the right amount of food when I had my fasting window at the appropriate length. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.